Good morning, and you're here with Late Talker Listens. We're talking with Rachel, Lucas's mom, who we've had a pretty long relationship with her son. He is now 12. Good morning, Rachel.
Oh, good morning. So nice to speak with both of you.
I'm glad we were able to get in touch.
Yeah, we're glad you're here.
Yeah, we're here with
Thank
Steve, and we thought of talking with you because you've sort of walked this journey for maybe a little, I have families that are just now beginning to wonder about, my child doesn't seem to be talking quite as much or just, thinking, maybe there's some ways I need to be supporting my son or daughter because I'm noticing some things. And you've, I think, done such a great job of that. So we wanted to talk with you. And I'm kind of wondering, do you want to share an experience this morning? Do you want to tell us a little bit about Lucas? Or do you have a question?
Well, sure. I'm happy to share a little bit about Lucas's journey. And then I have, I think, a really good question for you guys, too.
Okay.
But when I originally reached out to Mary, Lucas was probably about 6 or 7, and he really wasn't conversational yet. Now, we had started him off at a Montessori school, so we weren't getting a ton of critiques from teachers or, complaints about him. He was thriving and he was happy, but he wasn't speaking. And, we kind of were wondering, is he ever going to talk? Where is this going to go? So it was very much an anxiety-filled time for us. But I listened to Mary's advice, and we kept him at the Montessori school, which goes up to 8th grade. And he's just thrived there. And now if you met him today, everyone jokes that he's the mayor because, he went from barely speaking and not making eye contact to now, if you just met him and you had a conversation with him, you wouldn't even question his language. Once in a while, if he meets somebody new or if he's a little nervous, you'll see a little stutter or a little bit of like head movement trying to get words out. But for the most part, when I tell people today at 12 years old that he has a language disorder and a language-based learning disability, they say to me, "Are you sure?" Which is kind of funny.
Isn't that great?
After all the years of worry. So yeah, I think that's you've given me so much great advice over the years, but one of the best pieces of advice was, we did a lot of sacrifice, my husband and I, to keep our son in this amazing private Montessori school where he's just thrived not only academically, but also, socially, and just had the most amazing childhood so far. So we wanted to thank you for that.
Well, and you know what, who I really want to thank as well, or at least bring attention to, is I think your situation is where it really worked, right? You had parents and a school that partnered. You had a school that was listening to you. You had a school that was flexible. You had a school that met Lucas where he was and brought him forward. They weren't constrained by, well, what, grade is he supposed to be in? Or, what piece of math or literacy or is he supposed to be doing right this minute compared to, all the other people who are the same age as him or within, 2 months. They took each child at that school where they were and brought them forward. And I was always so impressed with that school. I just think it's a fabulous, fabulous school because, like anything else, all things aren't created equal. So that's a terrific school. And then they had really involved parents, right, that were following through. So it was really a perfect partnership. It's great.
So there's a lot of things about your narrative that are really important, I think, for all the parents that are listening to this to hear. The first one is that it's so important to have a school that believes in your child, and it is worth sacrificing for. I know it's difficulty and a hardship, but Montessori philosophy, and there's others too, but they meet the child where they are, and that was really, really so important for Lucas, that they were patient with him. As Mary said, they didn't try to push him to keep him up to grade level. They were patient. Yep. They're trying to take the long view, which is just so important. But the other part of it was that you have this panic or anxiety or there's a lot of worries that come up, particularly that 6-year-old level when a child first is in grade school, and you really do see some of the big gaps. But if you take a long view, a 6-year view, 5-year view, and so on, and you're patient, not every child is going to become the mayor, but we have other children that the name is the mayor. And so that can happen too. And so it's really important, not to look at a 6-year-old and say, I've got to catch them up in every area this year. If I don't have them caught up by third grade, then that's the end of their academic career for the rest of their life. And you're going to hear things like that. And so I'm really, really glad that that you and your husband were able to, with Mary's help, were able to kind of, meet that and stay with the plan, even though I'm sure there were so many moments where you're like, oh my goodness.
I do think a lot of parents ask me about critical age. Like there are a lot of stories out there, like if they don't get this by the time they're 3, they never can get it, or if they miss these reflex, then they can never get it, or if they don't have it by the time they're, so that's scary. But now you said
so Mary, before that, so that Mary knows that makes me really upset because usually that critical period argument is designed to steer you into an educational plan or a quote-unquote miracle cure, to scare you into buying a product or being in a school or something. And it just doesn't work that way. But, man, it can sure sound sciencey and can really kind of put a lot of pressure on you. So, again, I'm glad you didn't go for that.
Apparently, I tripped a nerve, whatever.
You did. She hit she's my wife, so she knows where all the nerves are. So and that's a nerve for me.
So calm down while I ask Rachel her question.
No, understandably.
All right. So tell me, like you said, you had a question for us. So I'm really excited to hear that. What's the question?
Yes. Well, I have two things to tell you too. So the other thing that we've done along with, his Montessori school, which is an authentic Montessori school, there's no tests, no grades, no homework. It's all, they do, everything is paper and pencil based, which is great because you're hearing like so many kids just doing with screens, even in kindergarten. Everything is project-based. They're writing essays in class, doing a mix of paper and pencil math along with the Montessori math. They use these beads and do snake addition, and I don't even understand it. It's pretty neat, though.
Yeah.
But we have been having him do kind of like as an ancillary thing, mathnasium, which has been amazing because it kind of has a Montessori approach where you don't move on. It doesn't matter your age or your grade level, you do not move on to the next, subject or the next level until you master something. So the one area that we found is Lucas is working probably 2 grade levels below in math, but they've said he's a perfect mathnasium student because since he started 3 years ago, he has exceeded the rate of improvement. I forget the percentage that they want you to improve every 6 weeks when they assess you. So he's doing amazing with it, but he's still, about 2 years behind in math, which they said, don't worry, as long as he's improving.
Exactly, yeah.
And that sounds like something Mary would say. So I guess my question to you, and I wrote it down so I don't fumble it, but here it is. How do parents figure out what types of careers might be a good fit for a child with a language disorder or language weaknesses and learning challenges? For example, if he wants to be an engineer like his dad because he loves bridges, but his math skills don't end up where they need to be by high school, is that something we should realistically rule out, or is that too early to be thinking that way? Should we be encouraging him to explore more skilled trades instead? And then also, are there any assessments or aptitude tests that can help identify careers based on a child's strengths, interests, and abilities?
That's a fabulous question. I'm going to let you take it first, but I have so much to say about that. But I'm going to let Steve take it first.
So the first thing I'm going to say is it's actually really wise that you're thinking about that in a 12-year-old.
Exactly.
Because it can be, 8, 5, 6, 7 year, 8-year on-ramp onto that career path. And it's not too early to start thinking about, okay, what are the things that Lucas needs to learn in order to go forward. Now, in terms of career choices, the basic idea is even at age 12, you can determine the things that he enjoys and the things that he doesn't enjoy. So, he's the mayor, so maybe he wants to be a telemarketer. Most of our late talkers wouldn't want to be a telemarketer, but, and that job may be going away with AI anyway. But as far as like your idea of, he likes bridges, he likes that visualization, that does kind of go into the area of engineering. And one path that we've seen a lot of success is into the trades. So graduate high school and then go into a trade. And then it's not unusual at all for the late talker, as they master the trade, to actually then go on and get engineering. So, we've seen a lot of Electricians, for example, they end up as electrical engineers, with a practical side to it. So that's not, that's a very common path. But the key and most important point, and then I'll turn it over to Mary, is that you don't want to pre-plan it, and you don't want to underestimate the journey and the path. So you want to offer opportunities, you want to offer encouragement. Your comment about math, he was behind in math, now he's 2 years behind in math. If he's 24 years old and has the math of a 22-year-old, that's going to be really good and candidly better than most Americans. So the fact that he's accelerating and learning that, and that'll be really good for him. But I really like the idea of thinking about and imagining how you're going to nurture him over the next 8 years to get him onto that career path. Very wise. You're clearly just an amazing mom.
Well,
thank you so much.
Here's what I would say, and I say this to parents, usually actually even a little before 12, honestly, is to start thinking about that. Steve said don't plan, but I do think you should aim. I do think you should come up with a target. Like, the things he likes, his strengths, his weaknesses, and include him in this conversation, right? And I actually, we sit down with a plan and put it on paper. And remember, it's a target. It's a target. It's something you're working towards. So list some occupations, list some things, go down and look at the job roles that, or get online, and list some things that have those components that he's good at, and then aim at that. When you start doing your vocabulary support, aim at vocabulary that's going to head towards that goal. When you do math, when you do literacy, when you do just the skills of everyday living, when you do, computer savvy, do it with those job targets and be really specific that you have in mind. You can change them, right? But you need to aim at something. And every time you individualize his educational plan, and especially for Lucas, he's going now into high school, which is all about transition. That's when you start saying, how does this goal on my IEP, or how does this thing you want to teach him, or how is this activity, how is that helping him towards our long-term goal? And we want that to be specific. We don't want it to be really kind of nebulous and have, the broad liberal arts kind of thing where, learning time is valuable, right? So use his learning time wisely. And it's interesting that you say that because, I got a email from a late talker that I work with for quite a long time. And it's so funny. It came 2 days ago, and here's your question. And he said, hey, it was good to hear from you. I just got my associate's degree in accounting. I was like, wow. And, this little boy reminds me so much of your son. And it's so funny that you asked this question. So he said, I'm keeping my job. I got a full-time job at Publix, and, they've promoted him. And I keep telling him, I want to go into the public relations portion, but I'm going to take my AA degree because he took his time, right? He's good with numbers. He enjoys numbers,
Wow.
And he said, I'm going to be looking for like a community job in accounting or helping a tax firm. Or I was like, I was just blown out of the water. So
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And, it was another situation where we had the helpers and the parents working as a team. They weren't excluding the parent. They weren't putting you into a program that's highly specialized that carries out procedures that are kind of unrelated to the practical world, right? So I think what you do, and maybe we'll talk after I get off the phone or whatever, but is you start brainstorming with your husband. Let's just put down a bunch of jobs we think Lucas would really like. Let's talk, and you get a long-term plan, and you revisit that long-term plan about every 6 months and say, you know what, it's changed a bit, or we're going to add this, or we're going to take away that, or we're going to shift the focus. But that's important now, and to start familiarizing yourself with all the resources out there. And helpers are good at that. Helpers are good at helping you with that. That's
amazing.
Yeah, I would absolutely do it because your son.
And Mary, I wanted to mention something that, or share this also with Dr. Camarata, that, because I remember this from the book. So Lucas's dad is an engineer, a civil engineer. Grandfather is a doctor, so I just have to laugh because I read about in the book the profile of the late talkers.
Right.
So there you go again. Here's another anecdotal example.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so true.
It's amazing how often that happens,
Now, the
right?
other thing you asked about was whether there's any tests that can help you with vocational choices.
Oh, yes,
and
that's
they
right.
are. There are. And in fact, high school counselors have them. So they're worth taking, particularly if the late talker can take tests like that. On the other hand, normally what they give you general areas as opposed to specific professions. And one of the programs I help with in Southern California is it's actually a healthcare related boot camp for high school graduates. And so there's a whole bunch of healthcare related jobs that are good for late talkers. They can be like docents for radiation oncology, radiation treatment delivery for cancer, doing
Lots of things. So many things.
drawing blood, lab tech, sonogram engineer. So there's just a lot of different, or ultrasound, I meant to say. So there's a lot of things like that. So taking that kind of a test, a vocational test, is really a good thing, but it won't necessarily tell you exactly what you should do. So that's good information to have as you're having that conversation with Lucas. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to say something else really quick, just for everybody out there and also for you, Rachel. One thing people aren't aware of who have been in the system and getting some special support, you have an IEP, right? Individual educational.
No.
Well, no, I mean just talking generally, not to you specifically.
Okay. Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know is when you leave, generally it's 8th grade, going into high school, you now, instead of having, and this is when it's federally funded and you have one through a public school, but it's a good way to think all the way around. You sort of leave your individual educational plan behind and you start what we call a transition plan. It's different, right? It's not how do we address every subject like every other kid and look at the state standard and blah, 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 which has its strengths and weaknesses actually. But when you go into high school, now it's a transition plan. How do we transition into life? I think you should start much earlier. But that's an important distinction for our families out there to know. The child's going to be involved. We're going to get really specific, and we're going to work towards it, right? Because we're not on a timeline that says, okay, you have 48 months to do this. No, we don't do that. We say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Maybe you'll do it faster. Maybe you'll do it somewhat slower, whatever. But, and in reality, when you look at adolescents and then young adults going through high school and getting out of high school, they all have their incubation period, honestly. Nobody gets out of high school or college. I mean, I don't know. You can survey your friends how many times kids are back home or figuring out a temporary job or working for Uncle Joe or trying to figure out what they're going to do. And that can vary in time for kids. So it's the same with late talkers. And
that's so true.
Yeah. And so let's make a long-term plan. Families, that's so important. And start early. I like to start around 6th grade, honestly. And if you want to, start jotting down ideas before that, go ahead. But anyway, I think your questions are really, really important ones for families of late talkers. So I love that you asked it.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll mention is that, when Lucas turns 14, it's not too early to get a part-time job as well, because there's also or volunteer, whatever it is. Yeah. So the young man that Mary mentioned, he started off, at Publix, with a part-time job, and then, he learned, all the things that go along with being on a job and how to do it, and he stayed with it, and then I believe that some of his education was paid for by Publix, so he ended up with this accounting. Yeah, so that part-time job actually ended up teaching him and giving him ideas that he could, then transition to. So I think generally speaking, saying, okay, here are the things that we want for a late talker, and then saying, okay, when he's 14, 15, whatever it is, get a part-time job.
Yeah. And I mean, you can tell Steve and I are really excited about your question. Once you come up with that target, once you come up with a smattering of careers that you think and Lucas thinks could be meaningful for him, now we work backwards, right? What kind of skills do you need? What kind of this do you need? That's when you get to, you could probably be a docent at the, deeds department downtown, or we could probably get you, we might want to consider working with the vet, or, if you're really interested, whatever it is, you work backwards and you come up. I mean, this long-term plan that you set the target, but now the work is to work backwards and say, okay, what do we need to know and how is my plan from here to there? Knowing that we can always change. Nothing is in cement, but that's what you do. And I just think it's so important. And I also think it's really fun. It's a really fun part.
And Mary, I thought of one more question if we have time.
We do.
We do. Well,
so,
we might make you 2 episodes because we are running pretty late.
That's fine. Yeah,
okay, but go ahead. That's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yes. So Lucas has, he's in the 4th to 6th grade class. So he's going into 6th grade this year. He's a little bit older.
Sure. That's fine.
He then has 7th and 8th grade, that cycle at his school, but his Montessori school only goes to 8th grade. And then what are your thoughts on him either A, going to our public school, which is an A-rated public schools with small academies in there you have to apply. Like there's an aerospace engineering and aviation, a culinary, lots of small academies.
It's a great, I know where you are because I know your schools.
Yeah, 20, I've talked to you about it, but 2,500 kids and, concerns of bullying and so forth, or versus trying to find a similar, either private school, home school, micro school, because you have to pull the Band-Aid off at some time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Mary start off with that one.
I honestly think you need to get yourself in those physical spaces. You need to meet with the person that's coordinating the smaller academies within the school. Public schools can do an amazing job. And really, quite frankly, because public school, high school is focused on a transition plan, it often looks and feels much different than the K through 8 IEP. It looks very different. So you need to go find out what their resources are, talk to them, have them tour you. Having said that, every city has its special programs that might even be appropriate. Like, so for example, here in Nashville, we have the hand-in-hand program at one private high school. We have the heart-to-heart program at another private high school, which is where they have endowed monies and endowed chairs to enroll, a good subset of kids that, are late talking for various and sundry reasons and at various degrees of involvement. And they are matriculated into the school. They go to classes. They have a homeroom that helps them sometimes navigate some of the challenges. So you might find that there is a small, and these actually aren't that small because relative to the number of students you're talking about there, these schools are about 800 enrollment, something like that.
Oh, wow.
But, they're excellent programs. So there's just no substitute for beating the bushes and starting to look now and make sure that you get into those physical spaces, meet people, talk to them, see what they're doing. I think that's the only way. And public schools can do an amazing job. We have some public schools here that do an amazing job. They really can. And especially how they manage that numbers. I'll also say this, not that you don't have to keep your eye out, but also in high school, the biggest risk, bullying happens at every age and stage, right? But the time we really worry about high school is when it eases up. High school is when the young adults, I know we're thinking about high schoolers, Mary, you can't mean this, but they really are more accepting. It's broader. It's usually much better. And that feels good too.
So I'll just add
more middle school. Gotcha.
Middle school is harder.
Middle school has its own, real big set of challenges. So I'll just add a couple things real quick. When you go into a big high school, and many of them are quite big, your idea of finding a specialty or niche program is really good because the idea is that our late talkers risk getting kind of lost in this big kind of system that public schools are. And so I'll just echo what Mary said, meet ahead of time, get a feel for the culture of the school. Certainly there is bullying that happens in high school, so you want to keep an eye out for that. But you're going to get a feel for the culture just in the same way that you found this Montessori school that had a good spirit, a good child-centered kind of culture. You want that in the high school too. You want to meet the principal. The principal sets the table and the culture for the school, and that'll give you a good sense. And then if you are starting this idea of a vocational educational plan for him, then you can see what high schools align with that. There's also there'll be one challenge for you in that they'll have to have him re-eligible, and the eligibility process can kind of go off the rails a little bit.
That's
Oftentimes
fun.
It works good, but you just have to be vigilant. Right. And I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just trying to say be vigilant because sometimes, And so I say, just what Mary said, absolutely approach the high school. Also look at privates. We have like a small private school here. It happens to be a Christian oriented, and they have that child-centered attitude, and we've had really good luck working with them. So there's sometimes our privates as well that you can look at. But there's no downside to going to the public and starting there,
Right.
just so long as you're keeping your
and
radar
you might
up.
even meet some families there that are
You
using
might,
the
yeah.
services that you're using. That'd be awesome. Get the scoop. You
Oh, right,
you just got to beat the bushes.
Yeah. And it can work,
that's
so
great
definitely
advice.
give it a try.
Yeah.
Yep.
They
Okay,
are
sounds good. Thank you
really,
so much.
their skill set is transition. But when you do transitions, you got to have that parent there kind of saying, where's the beef? How's this going to happen? When
Well-
I'm at, you got to be there.
But also, I have seen "quote unquote" transition programs that are more custodial
No,
than
that's what I
educational.
mean. You need the
So-
parent
When
there.
you tested him, you saw his visual spatial was off the charts, and we experience that all the time. We're driving to, 3 hours away somewhere near Disney. We pass a place like a dude ranch we haven't been in 4 years, but on the other side of it, he's like, oh, I think this is blah, blah, dude ranch. And I'm like, no, it's definitely not. And it turns out he was right, and he remembered it just from seeing it, but it was on the opposite side of it from 4 years ago. So
That's
he has
impressive,
an
and late talkers do that.
amazing-
Yeah, he's good that
amazing
way.
memory.
He's
Yeah,
good that way.
yeah,
Yeah, a
and the
lot
fact
of
that you could
instances
rotate
like
it
that.
visually, that's a good skill. Something,
Right. So we don't want to, like you said, we don't want to count him out yet. Like he.
Oh,
has-
never count him. Never count out any late
You
talker
keep
ever.
that bar where
Never
he's-
count out
where
a
it's
late
good for
talker
him.
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Well-
good.
And thanks to your book and thanks to all the years
Oh.
with Mary.
Oh,
I mean,
thank
you've
you.
really
That's
guys kept my faith going whenever I started to stumble. I just,
Oh,
had a call with Mary, and thankfully he's just been getting
Yeah,
kind
such
of
a
blowing
great.
every out of the water.
Yeah, just a
in so
wonderful
many
young
areas.
man.
and I
He
love
is a
this
wonderful
because that persistence and that belief and that support. It's wonderful to see this.
Yeah, it
Such a
is.
wonderful call. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Oh,
All right,
my pleasure.
Rachel.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for all your time.
All right. We'll talk soon, Mary.
All right, bye.
Take care.
Bye.